I used to believe Ethan and I had something unshakable. Years of marriage had turned us into a well-rehearsed duet, predictable, familiar, steady. He knew how I liked my coffee. I knew the rhythm of his breathing at night. But lately something felt off. His touch wasn't as present, his words felt rehearsed, and his laughter, once easy and genuine, now seemed forced. At first, I told myself it was stress. Work had been demanding for both of us, and people go through phases, right? But the excuses started stacking up. He'd leave the room to take calls, keep his phone glued to his side, and whenever I asked what was wrong, he'd brush me off with a tired smile. Nothing, babe. Just work. But I knew better. Then came the suggestion, more like an insistence. You should have dinner with your mom tonight, he said, his voice too casual. He even offered to make the reservation for us, as if he needed me gone. My stomach twisted in a way that I couldn't ignore anymore. Something wasn't just off, it was wrong. That night, when he finally fell asleep, I did what I never thought I'd do. I reached for his phone. Hands shaking, I scrolled through his messages until my eyes landed on one that made my heart stop. She'll be gone tonight. Come over at 8. I read it again, and again, and again. But instead of breaking down, something inside me hardened. If he thought he could make a fool out of me, he had no idea who he was dealing with. A strange calm settled over me as I put his phone back, my hands steady now. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. No, that would be too easy for him. Instead, I sat in the dark, listening to his breathing, letting the anger simmer, letting it sharpen into something useful. He thought he could erase me with a single text. He thought I'd disappear, leave the stage so he could play the devoted husband by day and the cheating bastard by night. I stared at him, sleeping peacefully beside me, as if he hadn't just shattered everything we built. I wondered how many lies he'd told with that same mouth that whispered, "I love you," just days ago. How many nights had I been out, trusting him, while he was here with her? My pulse pounded in my ears, but I forced myself to breathe, to think. By morning, I had a plan. When Ethan woke up, stretching like a man with no worries in the world, I smiled at him. I played my part flawlessly, even when he kissed my cheek like nothing had changed. I'll head to Mom's later, I told him casually over breakfast. His eyes flickered. Relief, maybe? Disbelief that I was making this too easy? Either way, he nodded. And so, I let him believe it. Let him think he'd won. Let him think tonight would be his perfect little escape. But I wasn't going anywhere. If he was going to play his game, then I'd make damn sure he regretted ever putting me in it. The rest of the day passed in slow motion. I went through the motions, texting my mom about dinner, throwing an overnight bag into the backseat of my car, even sending Ethan a quick, "See you tomorrow, love you," before I left. I made sure he saw me drive away, watching me through the window like the deceitful man he was. But I didn't go far. Just a few streets down, parked in the shadows, engine off, heart pounding. My fingers gripped the steering wheel as I watched the minutes tick by, each one bringing me closer to confirmation, to betrayal. The house stood silent in the distance, the same house that held years of love, of memories, of promises, and tonight, it would hold something else entirely. 8 p.m. Right on cue. A car slowed near the driveway, headlights off, careful. My stomach clenched as I watched a woman step out, heels clicking against the pavement, hair perfect, a little black dress hugging her body in all the right places. She was nervous, excited, disgusting. I sat there, watching, absorbing every detail as she disappeared inside. Ethan was waiting for her, probably smiling, probably kissing her the way he used to kiss me. The thought burned, but I swallowed it down. Tears wouldn't fix this, rage wouldn't fix this. But what I had planned? That would. I took one last deep breath and stepped out of the car. It was time to go home. Walking up the driveway felt surreal. My own home, the place I had built with Ethan, now a stage for his betrayal. The porch light was off, He thought he was being careful. He thought he was in control. But the truth was, tonight, every move he made was playing into my hands. I slipped in through the back, quiet as a shadow. The house smelled different. Wine, perfume, anticipation. I could hear the murmur of voices in the living room, low and intimate. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay steady. There was no turning back now. This wasn't just about catching him. It was about teaching him. Moving through the house, I worked quickly. The dining table, once reserved for anniversary dinners, lazy Sunday breakfasts, became my canvas. A pristine white tablecloth, delicate candlelight, wine glasses filled to the brim. It looked elegant, intimate, fitting for the occasion. I plated the food with careful precision. Every detail mattered. And then, for the final touch, 2 place settings, side by side, the perfect dinner for 2. Only this time, it wasn't meant for them. It was meant for me, for the woman he underestimated. And soon, he'd learn just how costly that mistake would be. I moved through the kitchen with quiet purpose, my hands steady as I set the final touches. The soft glow of candlelight flickered against the silverware, reflecting the calm I forced onto my face. A perfect meal, a romantic setting, everything Ethan thought he was getting tonight, except this wasn't his fantasy anymore. It was mine. From the other room, I heard their laughter. Low, flirtatious. It made my skin crawl. He used to laugh like that with me. I pressed my lips together, forcing myself to breathe. No more thinking about what we used to be. That version of us was dead. I had to focus on what came next. I took a step back, admiring my work. The table was set, the wine poured, the illusion complete. The only thing missing was me. And I knew exactly when to make my entrance. I picked up his phone from the counter where he had carelessly left it, the same one he had clutched so protectively around me. This time, it was my turn to check his messages. And there it was. Her name, her texts, her excitement. I can't wait to see you. Finally alone. Just us. A smirk curled at the corner of my lips. Oh, sweetheart, you have no idea. I placed Ethan's phone back exactly where I found it, letting the screen dim as his mistress's words faded into darkness. My pulse was steady now. No more hesitation. No more doubt. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming the power he thought he'd stolen from me. The murmur of voices in the other room grew softer, more intimate. I could picture them. Her leaning in, him smiling, whispering the same lies he once told me. It was almost laughable. He had no idea I was just feet away, pulling the strings, setting the stage for his downfall. I stepped closer to the dining room entrance, listening. Ethan's voice was smooth, practiced. I told you, she's with her mom. We have all night. The woman giggled, oblivious. Pathetic. I took one last glance at the candlelit table, the wine, the carefully plated meal. Everything was ready, and then, with a slow, deliberate breath, I stepped into the doorway. I'm so glad you two could make it, I said, my voice calm, almost amused. I made dinner for us. The room froze. Ethan's face drained of color as he turned toward me, mouth slightly open, like a fish gasping for air. His mistress blinked, confusion shifting into panic. I smiled, stepping forward, the warm glow of the candles flickering against my skin. It would have been rude not to introduce myself, don't you think? Silence. Heavy, suffocating. It stretched between us like an invisible force, pressing down on the room. I let it linger, savoring the way Ethan's face twisted. Shock, fear, the slow, dawning realization that his perfectly constructed lie had just collapsed. His mistress was the first to react. She shifted in her seat, her wide eyes darting between us, her fingers tightening around the stem of her wineglass. Who? She stammered, looking to Ethan for an explanation. But he had nothing. No quick excuse, no rehearsed line. Just guilt, laid bare under the soft flicker of candlelight. I took my time stepping toward the table, running my fingers along the back of one of the chairs. You know, I mused, tilting my head slightly. When Ethan suggested I go visit my mother tonight, I thought it was such a thoughtful idea. I mean, why would my loving husband want me out of the house? I let my gaze settle on him, watching the way his Adam's apple bobbed when he swallowed. And then it hit me. Maybe he wanted to have a romantic dinner. Just not with me. The woman's breath hitched, her hand covering her mouth as realization set in. She hadn't known. I could see it now, the way her entire body tensed, the way she angled herself ever so slightly away from him. Interesting. But this moment wasn't about her. It was about him. And he still hadn't said a word. Ethan finally found his voice, though it came out weak, almost breathless. Lily, I can explain. I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. Explain? I echoed, pulling out a chair and taking a slow, deliberate seat at the table. Oh, please, Ethan, do explain. I'd love to hear how this... I gestured toward the wine, the candlelit dinner, the woman sitting across from him. Was just some kind of misunderstanding. His mistress was already backing away from the table, her face pale. You told me you weren't married, she whispered, shaking her head, her voice laced with anger. You lied to me. I raised an eyebrow, watching as Ethan turned to her, desperate. No, it's not like that. Not like that? I interrupted smoothly, pulling something from my pocket and placing it on the table with a quiet thud. 2 crisp sheets of paper, neatly folded. Ethan's gaze flickered to them, confusion crossing his features, before understanding dawned. I smiled. It's funny, really. While you were busy sneaking around, I was preparing too. I tapped the papers. Divorce papers, already signed. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. You lose everything, Ethan? The house, the accounts, the life you took for granted, and the best part? I let my smile widen, my voice dropping to a near whisper. This moment, it's not just between us. His expression shifted from panic to something darker, his body tensing. I reached for my phone and held it up, the red recording light blinking in the dim room. His mistress gasped. Oh my God. I turned to her, still calm, still composed. You should probably leave now, I said gently. Unless you want to be part of his downfall. The woman shot up from her chair, nearly knocking over her wine glass. I didn't know, she stammered, shaking her head. I swear, I didn't know. She grabbed her purse with trembling hands, glancing between me and Ethan like she was trapped in some waking nightmare. Maybe she was. Maybe we all were. But only one of us had control of how this story ended. I didn't stop her as she stumbled toward the door. She wasn't the one I wanted to destroy. This wasn't about her. She had made a mistake, one she'd have to live with. But the man sitting across from me, the one who had built his life on deception, who had smiled at me this morning knowing damn well he was planning to betray me tonight, he was the one who deserved every bit of what was coming. Ethan finally snapped out of his daze, reaching for my phone with shaking hands. Lily, don't. Just stop recording, okay? We can talk about this. Please. And I pulled it back before he could touch it, tilting my head. Talk? Like how you talked to her? I gestured toward the door where his mistress had just fled. Like how you talked to me every time you looked me in the eye and lied. I leaned back, exhaling slowly, savoring his desperation. No, Ethan. We're past talking. His breathing was heavy now, his eyes darting between me and the phone, as if there was some magic combination of words that could undo all of this. There wasn't. You don't have to do this, he begged, voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Oh, but I do. With one final press of my thumb, the video uploaded. Sent. Shared. The weight of it lifted from me in an instant. And now, so does everyone else. The color drained from his face as he realized. His career, his reputation, his carefully curated image. It was all over. And for the first time in our marriage, Ethan truly had nothing to say. Ethan sat frozen, his breath coming in shallow bursts. I could see the wheels turning in his head, desperately searching for an escape. But there wasn't one. Not this time. His downfall was already in motion, and he knew it. "I can fix this," he muttered, mostly to himself. I can explain to people. It's not what it looks like. Maybe if we—" I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "We?" I repeated, shaking my head. "Oh, Ethan, there is no we anymore." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, making sure he saw the certainty in my eyes. "You don't get to spin this. You don't get to control the narrative. I do. And the world already knows exactly who you are." His hands trembled as he reached for the phone he had so carelessly left on the counter. When he unlocked it, his face paled even further. Notifications flooded the screen, missed calls, messages. The damage was already spreading like wildfire. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. I tilted my head, feigning sympathy. "Oh? Are people starting to see the real you?" I asked, my voice light, almost playful. "Must be so embarrassing." His jaw tightened, his eyes pleading now. "Lily, please, just listen. I made a mistake, but I love you. You don't have to do this. We can work this out." I stood up, smoothing my dress, and let out a slow breath. "Ethan, I did love you. I loved the man I thought you were." I picked up the divorce papers from the table and held them out. "But that man doesn't exist. And now, neither do we." Ethan stared at the papers in my hands like they were a loaded gun. Maybe, in a way, they were. His last thread of control over me, severed with a few signatures and the undeniable truth. His hands clenched into fists on the table, his chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths. "Lily, don't do this," he said, voice cracking under the weight of his own desperation. "You can't just throw everything away." I raised an eyebrow, letting the words sink in. I was throwing everything away? I was the one destroying what we had? The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Instead, I exhaled, calm, composed. "That's funny," I said, tilting my head, "because that's exactly what you did the moment you invited her here." His lips parted, but no words came. What could he say? That it was a mistake? That it meant nothing? I had heard those pathetic excuses before, from men like him, from men who believed love was a game where they made the rules. I leaned down, placing the divorce papers directly in front of him. "You'll sign them," I said quietly, the softness in my voice more dangerous than any scream. "Or I'll make sure this video finds its way to every corner of your life. Your work, your friends, your family. Do you really want them to see you like this?" His eyes flickered with something dark, anger, shame, maybe even hatred. But I didn't care. Let him be angry, let him be bitter. It wouldn't change a damn thing. I slid the pen toward him. "Your choice." For a long moment, Ethan didn't move. His fingers twitched near the pen, but he didn't reach for it. His eyes flicked up to mine, searching, hoping for a crack, a moment of hesitation. But there was nothing left to find. I had already mourned the end of us. I had already burned the version of myself that would have begged him for an explanation, for an ounce of decency. Now I was simply here to watch him choke on the consequences. Finally, with a slow exhale, he picked up the pen. His hand shook as he signed his name, the ink bleeding into the paper like a wound. Good. I grabbed the documents the second he was done, folding them neatly as if they were just another part of my to-do list. "See? That wasn't so hard." My voice was light, almost sweet, but I didn't bother hiding the edge underneath. Ethan's head dropped into his hands, his whole body deflated, as if the weight of his mistakes had finally settled onto his shoulders. For the first time, he looked truly small, pathetic. I stepped back, slipping the papers into my bag. "Oh, and one more thing," I said, my voice casual as I moved toward the door. "I'll be needing you out of my house by morning." His head snapped up. "Your house?" I smirked, tapping my bag. "Did you even read what you signed, Ethan?" He opened his mouth, but I was already walking away, leaving him alone in the candlelit mess he had created. The morning air was crisp when I stepped outside, the sky painted in soft pinks and oranges. A new day. A new life. And behind me, inside that house, the wreckage of a man who thought he could break me and walk away unscathed. I didn't look back as I walked to my car, my bag slung over my shoulder, divorce papers secured inside. There was no need. I had left Ethan with nothing but his regrets, and regrets weren't my burden to carry anymore. He'd figure out soon enough that the house, the accounts, even the car in the driveway, they weren't his anymore. Sliding into the driver's seat, I let out a slow breath. It felt different, lighter. The weight I had been carrying, the doubt, the heartbreak, the betrayal, had finally lifted. I was no longer the woman who begged for honesty, who ignored the signs, who let love blind her to the truth. That version of me was gone, and in her place, someone sharper, someone stronger, someone free. My phone buzzed. I already knew who it was. Ethan. The texts had been coming all night, desperate apologies, frantic pleas, empty promises. I didn't bother reading them. Instead, I tapped my screen and blocked his number. No final words, no second chances. I put the car in drive and pulled away. It was time to leave the past exactly where it belonged. The further I drove, the easier it became to breathe. The streets I had memorized for years, the ones that had always led me back to him, now stretched ahead like open roads to something better. A life of my own, untouched by his betrayal. I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming myself. I didn't have a final destination in mind, just the need to move, to put space between me and the wreckage. So I drove, letting the hum of the engine and the soft rhythm of the city waking up drown out whatever emotions still clung to me. After a while, I pulled into a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place I never used to visit alone. It felt strange, stepping inside without checking in with someone, without sending a text that said, "Hey, want me to grab you something?" But there was something freeing in it too, a reminder that I didn't belong to anyone anymore. I ordered my coffee, black, no sugar, and took a seat by the window. As I sipped, I let myself absorb the moment. No Ethan, no lies, no tension coiled in my chest, waiting for the next excuse, the next half-truth. Just me, a quiet morning, and the knowledge that my life was mine again. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. As I sat there, watching the world move outside the cafe window, a quiet realization settled over me. I had spent so much time mourning the loss of something I thought was real, holding on to a version of Ethan that had never truly existed. But now I didn't feel the need to look back. A soft chime rang as a new customer entered, their laughter filling the space, warm and unburdened. I smiled to myself. I had forgotten what it felt like, to sit alone and not feel lonely, to exist without waiting for the other shoe to drop, to be enough just as I was. I reached for my phone, not to check messages from him, those would never come through again, but to scroll mindlessly, to search for something new. A weekend getaway, maybe. A class I had always wanted to take. Something just for me, because for the first time in years, I didn't have to compromise. I didn't have to ask permission. My life was entirely my own. As I finished my coffee, I caught my reflection in the window. My eyes were clear, my lips curved into the faintest smirk, and I knew Ethan would regret losing me for the rest of his life. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I left the cafe, the sun warming my skin as I stepped outside. A new day, a new beginning. And this time dinner would be for one.